it on anonymous authentication for UTM assets. And I'll go in this part of the presentation to explain UTM environment, highlight the problems with identity exposure, and show why anonymous authentication is needed. Now we start off by looking at what UTM actually means on slide one. To begin, UTM or U-Space in Europe is basically the digital ecosystem that manages low altitude drone operation. You can pretty much think of it as the centralized version of air traffic control, but made specifically for drones. It basically helps coordinate drones flights in real times, support autonomous and high density operation, and make sure that everything stays safe and compliant at the scale. This system is what allows drones to operate safely in a busy environment, or maybe you can look at it as a complex environment. Now, on the next slide, we will look at the main goals of UTM and why it's designed to achieve. First goal, UTM is built around very few or major goals. The first one is safety, making sure that drones don't collide with each other and preventing unauthorized flights. And the second one is accountability, making sure that only authorized operators can access the airspace. And the third is security. It basically means that protecting the system from spoofing, impersonation, and also replay attacks. And the last, but one is the performance and scalability, meaning that the system must support thousands of drones operating at the same time across large regions. These goals not only shape the authentication and privacy requirement we are focused on this project, it also, on the next slide, we'll go over how UTM operation actually flow across different phases. So on with UTM operation phases, it follow four phases. The first phase is registration, basically where the operator and the UAV are validated and credentialed. And the second phase is planning. It's basically where the flight intent is submitted and approved before the drone takes off. And the third phase is tactical. This is where the real-time authentication happens and where remote ID broadcasts are used during the flights. And the fourth phase is oversight or strategic monitoring, where regulators enforce compliance and review logs. Most of the privacy problems we are solving appear in the tactical phase. And to understand why, we will look into how US and the AU handle remote ID differently on slide five. Remote ID is basically handled very differently in the US and in Europe. In the United States, the FAA requires drones to be broadcasted with a persistent remote ID for the entire flight. This ID is public and anyone nearby can capture, which make it very linkable. In contrast, we can look at the European use space model put a stronger focus on privacy by design. Its limit unnecessary identity disclosure, tries to reduce what information is exposed during flights. The difference here highlight a major privacy gap that the current system here in America still have. This lead directly to the core issues we are addressing here, which is identity likability problems on the next slide. Identity likability problems. The biggest issue is in today is most remote ID system broadcast the same identity identifier for the entire flight. That means that if a different observer or authenticator capture the signal in multiple zones, they can easily link all those broadcasts together. And once they do that, they can reconstruct the entire flight path, identify patterns, and even figure out the operator home base and client location. This pretty much create a commercial risk, privacy risk, and even safety risk. And it's one of the main barriers preventing wider UTM adoption. So now let's talk about how why identity likability problems matter so much for operators. In the next slide. Identity likability has a real consequence for operators. Well, one of the main thing is it can reveal sensitive informations, expose them to competitors, and even make them a target for physical and cyber attacks. Because of these risks, many operators lose trust in UTM systems, and they are less willing to adopt them unless strong privacy protection are in place. Um, this is why our frameworks will focus on enabling secure authentication while protecting identity and flight patterns. With that foundation being covered, we'll move on to the next slide by my colleague here, Solomon.
Hi everyone, my name is Salme and I will be talking about a growing challenge in drone traffic management and how we keep people safe in the airspace without turning every drone mission into a tracking tool. Right now, most remote ID and UTM systems are identity-based. Every time a drone talks to the networks, those messages are tied directly to the real operator. That means the operator's identity can be exposed during sensitive or tactical missions. Flights over time can be easily linked back to the same person or company. This creates privacy and trust barriers, and it ultimately slows down UTM adoption and scalability. So the core problem is our current authentication mechanisms reveal more about operators and their missions than is actually needed for safety. Next slide. This isn't just a niche issue because drones are quickly becoming critical infrastructure tools, not just gadgets. UTM has to support logistics and delivery like packages or medical supplies, agricultural automation and crop monitoring, industrial inspection of pipelines, power lines, and other assets, emergency response and public safety missions, and in the future, large-scale autonomous drone operations. At this scale, flight data is extremely sensitive. It can reveal where infrastructure is located, how often it's inspected, and even how emergency services respond. So, if privacy is weak at the UTM layer, we're baking strategic and security risks into the core of our infrastructure. Next slide. Identity-based UTM ties the real-world operator to a detailed picture of their activity, their flight paths, how often they fly, which regions they operate in, and where their clients or assets are located. Once that's all tied to a name or organization, we get some serious consequences. Commercial intelligence leakage, such as competitors can infer who your clients are and how you operate. There are safety risks, like attackers can spot patterns in high-value or sensitive missions. And lastly, target profiling. So both operators and clients can effectively be mapped and tracked over time. So a system that is supposed to provide safety and accountability can double as a very powerful tracking and profiling tool. Next slide. And that has a direct impact on adoption. Operators are hesitant to fully embrace UTM when they feel their operations are overly exposed. Competitors can quietly observe their patterns. Sensitive missions become permanently traceable, and every flight adds to their regulatory and data trail. When people don't trust how their data will be used, they either participate reluctantly or they look for ways to stay outside the system. So without strong built-in privacy guarantees, UTM struggles to achieve the scale and cooperation that regulators, industry, and the public actually want. So in order to improve this, next slide, we will have to understand who is in the ecosystem and what they need. So the UAV operator, they need credentials to fly, but they also need mission privacy for themselves and their clients. The UAV or onboard module, this is where pseudonyms and cryptographic keys live, and it signs telemetry to prove authenticity. The UTM service provider verifies credentials and enforces policies, but shouldn't see more identity information than necessary. The Enrollment and Identity Authority does a one-time strong identity check and anchors a real person or organization. The PCA issues short-lived anonymous credentials so drones can prove they're authorized without revealing real-world identity every time. The verifier nodes checks signatures, detects spoofing or replay, and maintains system integrity. Regulators need accountability and remote ID compliance, and they require a way to de-anonymize when there's a legitimate reason. The public and bystanders expect safe, privacy-aware operations over their heads, and adversaries are always present trying to link missions, exploit metadata, or inject false information. These stakeholders collectively define the requirements, the attack surface, and the trust model. Any realistic solution has to balance all of them, giving regulators accountability, giving operators privacy, and resisting adversaries at the same time. So, current identity-based UTM exposes operators and clients far more than is necessary for safety. As drones become critical infrastructure, those exposures turn into commercial, privacy, and security risks. Next, I will pass on to Varun to talk about our threat model.
Hello everyone, I'm Varun. I'll walk through the net threat model and architectural foundation that enables anonymous yet verifiable authentication in the UTM. So here we present the combined stride and Linden threat model for our anonymous authentication system. On the left, we map our privacy-centric threat using Linden, such as cross-flight linkability, behavior, fingerprinting, and participation detection. These highlight privacy risks that appear when UAV flights can be correlated back to the operators. On the right, we map straight security threats, registration fraud, credential theft, tampering replay attacks, PCA compromise, and DAA misuse. By listing both models together, we ensure the system design accounts for both security and privacy, which are equally important in UTM environments. So each step in the process, registration, pseudonym issuance, signing, verification, and potential de-anonymization, is paired with its corresponding attack points. For example, the operator registration phase is vulnerable to identity fraud. The PCA issuance phase is vulnerable to impersonation of credential threat. The UAV model has a critical attack surface because it stores pseudonym keys. The verification is a hotspot for replay or tampering attacks. The DAA phase must be tightly controlled to prevent unauthorized identity exposure. This mapping ensures that every component risk is fully understood before defining mitigation. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes the core evolution of our solution. We introduce an authentication layer that proves authorization without revealing the operator's civil identity. This prevents flight patterns from becoming linkable, protects operator privacy, and makes the remote ID safer for civilian use. The system still supports uncontrolled identity reveal through DAA, but only during legally verified incidents. Overall, this approach aligns with privacy by design principles and increases trust for both operators and regulators. Next slide, please. Our solution relies on short-lived pseudonyms to prevent correlation of flights, anonymous digital credentials issued by the PCA, and authorization-only verifier, which checks whether the drone is allowed to fly without needing to know who the operator is. A controlled legal-only de-anonymization path managed by the DAA. So this ensures operators remain private during the normal operations while still complying with the regulatory safety requirements. Next slide, please. To structure the system properly, we used well-established architectural security patterns from the course. These include the Credential Authority Pattern (PCA) for issuing anonymous credentials, Enrollment and Identity Authority Pattern for initial identity verification, Gatekeeper or broken pattern for the UTM core, security audit login log pattern for lawful unmasking, secure channel pattern to protect communication flows. Each pattern ensures the system maintains confidentiality, integrity, and controlled accountability. Next slide, please. So here we break down the main components of our architecture. The operator client requires pseudonyms and interacts with the system. The EIA handles one-time civil identity verification. The PCA generates the short-lived anonymous credentials. The UAV model securely stores those credentials and use them for signing. The UTM core validates requests using pseudonym-based authorization. And finally, the DAA handles identity revelation only when an incident requests instigation. So together, these components create a full end-to-end privacy preserving authentication flow. That concludes the breakdown of our security patterns and system components. From here, Simon will walk us through the next components.
Okay, so I'm Simon, and now these slides show the full this slide shows the full architecture of our anonymous authentication system within the UTM boundary. On the left, we have the operator and the UAV. During registration, the operator interacts with the enrollment and identity authority, the EAI for one-time civil identity verification. The pseudonym credential authority, the PCA, then issues short-lived anonymous credentials. During flight operations, the UTM core verifies authorization without knowing the real identity. Only if an incident occurs does the DAA legally reveals the identity. This preserves privacy during normal operations while ensuring full accountability when required. On this next slide, basically it summarizes the full authentication life cycle. First, the operator registers once with the EAI. Then the PCA issues short-lived anonymous credentials. The UAV securely loads these credentials before flight. When a flight is requested, the UAV submits an anonymous authorization request. The UTM verifies it without knowing who the pilot is. Authorization is granted or denied based only on cryptography proof. And finally, only with a legal trigger can the DAA reveal the real identity. This diagram over here. Oh, sorry. Okay. This slide highlights where attackers can interact with or exploit the systems. The main attack surfaces include the wireless channel between UAV and UTM, the credential issuance workflow, and the verifier infrastructure itself. Attackers could also target audit logs and multi-UTM federation links. These areas form the basis for our Stride and Linden threat analysis. Um, Now from our threat modeling, we identify five major risks. First, replay attacks, where all messages are reused. Second, linkability attacks, which try to correlate multiple flights to the same operator. Third, a compromised credential authority. Fourth, verifier collision, where different verifiers cooperate to break privacy. And finally, audit log tampering. These threats combine both security risks and privacy risks, which is why our design threats both together. So now my colleague Jay is gonna take it from now on.
Hey everyone, I'm Jay, and I'll be going over the next part of our slides. So this is our quantitative risk matrix. So in our risk assessment, we identified 5 critical threats in the red zone, and linkability is our highest concern. So this is where attackers could correlate pseudonyms across flight zones and track operators. And then next we have replay attacks, which are high risk since wireless networks are easily monitored. And then we have PCA compromise, which would enable unlimited fraudulent credentials. And we have verifier collusion between UTM providers, and this could reconstruct complete flight histories. Then we have log tampering, which would destroy our accountability. So overall, we had 5 critical risks, and then 8 high priority risks, and then 14 medium to low risks requiring mitigation. Next slide. So we established 3 main requirement categories, and the first one is security requirements. So we have mutual authentication using TLS and signatures, replay resistance through nonces and timestamps, and controlled credential insurance or issuance through our PCA. And then we have our privacy requirements. So unlinkability, so flights can be correlated, metadata minimization to prevent side channel attacks, and controlled de-anonymization where identity is only revealed legally. And then our last one is integrity and accountability. So there's key isolation, verifier integrity, and immutable logs. And these all map directly to Stride and Linden frameworks. So next slide. And then this is our requirements traceability matrix. So each requirement addresses specific threats. So we have R1, which is mutual authentication. This prevents spoofing and denial of service. And we have R2, replay resistance. So this stops replay attacks through nonce validation. R3, unlinkability. So this prevents cross-flight tracking. Then we have R4, which is metadata minimization. So this addresses detectability and profiling. R5, which is controlled de-anonymization, provides accountability while maintaining privacy. R6, log integrity, prevents tampering with append-only audit trails. And then we have R7, key isolation, which protects against PCA compromise. And then all these requirements also trace to Strad and Linden threat categories. Next slide. And this is our architecture versus the requirements. So our architecture implements these requirements for each vulnerability that we addressed earlier. So unlinkability uses short-lived certificates with frequent pseudonym rotation. And then mutual authentication leverages TLS plus signed credentials. And we have replay protection, which uses our demo nonce and timestamp detection module. Control de-anonymizations through DAA reveals identity only with legal authority. We have metadata minimization, which ensures no civil identity crosses UTM networks, only the anonymous signatures. Then we have log integrity, which uses hash-chained append-only audit trails, as I mentioned earlier. And then each of these components directly addresses a security or privacy requirement with the comprehensive threat coverage. So that wraps it up for me, and Shareth will take over the last part.
So thank you, Jay. So now we're gonna go with the key trade-offs. Now our solution had to balance like four major factors. The first one is like privacy and accountability. So we want operators to stay anonymous during normal flights, but regulators still need to a way to identify them in a during legal incidents. So our design achieved this through controlled de-anonymization. So the second one is like performance versus cryptographic security. So strong privacy uses heavier cryptography, which can slow down real-time UTM operators. So we optimize by using lightweight pseudonym certificate that refresh frequently. So coming to third one, like scalability versus system complexity. So supporting thousands of drones requires simple workflow. We minimized architecture overhead so UTM providers can scale without large infrastructure changes. And coming to the final fourth one, so public trust and operational overhead. So we preserve trust for operators and the public without adding excessive burden on the ecosystem. So overall, our architecture finds a balanced middle ground across this trade-off. Next slide. So in demo overview, we developed a working demo that validates the core ideas of our system. So the demo includes like credential generations and anonymous signature creation, verification inside the UTM workflow, and replay attack detection, a linkability probability simulation. So together, this shows that the anonymous authentication is not only possible but practical for UTM operators. So next slide, please. So this is a demo so in this we're gonna import several Python modules like hashlib and hashmag for generating secure hashes and date and time the like timestamps and randomness so IDs can't be guessed and metaforward libraries for graph later so OS for system operators the pseudonymic generation, like Y16 characters, like short enough to use quickly, but still cryptographically stronger. So the main purpose is the pseudonymic hidden, like hides the drones and users' real identity, but still that the system authenticates them securely. Next slide. So coming to validation scenarios, like we validated our solution using three different scenarios. The first one is like tactical authentication. So this stress reply prevention, like signature correctness, and also the ability of UTM to authenticate drones, without learning their real identity. So coming to second one, like federated UTM privacy stress test. So multiple verifiers try to correlate with drone activities, So our pseudonym rotation strongly reduced that chance of linkability. So coming to the last one, like remote ID pseudonymic integrated test, like we ensure that remote ID broadcasters does not link identity and metadata. So like these scenarios confirm that our design holds up like under both security and also the privacy measures. Next slide. So coming to our key contributions, like our project provides several major contributions. So the first one is like privacy first and architecture for UTM. So supports uh, anonymous operation while still allowing accountability to like when legally required. And the scalable design that regulates and operators can also trust. So the working demo that provides a technical and operational feasibility. And the most important, a direct solution to identify, I mean, like identity and linkability problem that currently limitates to UTM adoption. Next slide. So, yeah, the future works like to extend this work, we proposed several improvements like deploying multiple PCA authorities for redundancies and also the trust distribution. So, performing like formal verification to mathematically guarantee unlinkability and also the integrity. Our system will excite existing programs such as LAANC and remote ID, adding hardware back estimate to secure onboarding pseudonym storage. So these extensions can bring our approach closer to real world deployment. So to wrap up this, like to conclude, like our project shows that it is possible to build a UTM ecosystem that is like secure, scalable, and privacy preserving at the same time. Anonymous authentication can significantly increase trust for both operators and also the regulators, and can unlock the future for dense drone operations. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is our presentation.